Hi, it's Katrina. Number 10. Mount Vesuvius. Living in the vicinity of Mount Vesuvius 2,000 years ago was not ideal. We learned this in 1748, when a group of explorers rediscovered the site of Pompeii, long after it was utterly destroyed by a volcanic eruption in the year 79 AD. This is when the city was buried under a blanket of volcanic ash. One witness to the eruption wrote that dust poured across the land like a flood, and that the city was cast into darkness. An estimated 2,000 people died almost instantly, preserved like marble statues amidst the dust and debris of their destroyed city. Pompeii was abandoned and forsaken as a place of curses and evil by the Romans, seen as a dead land where no one dared to go. However, at one time, Pompeii wasn't so grim. The city was settled by the Greeks around the 8th century BC. It was an independent town that kept to itself up until it fell under Roman influence in the 2nd century BC. Soon enough, the Bay of Naples became a popular destination for wealthy Romans. And by the time the 1st century AD rolled around, Pompeii was a resort city, almost like Puerto Vallarta or Cancun in Mexico. It was a place of elaborate villas, paved streets, sparkling water fountains, and rich vacation goers. There were about 12,000 people living in Pompeii on the night of the eruption, and the next day, there were 0. I'm excited to announce that this video is sponsored by Wonder. Wonder is an app that uses artificial intelligence to create artwork. All you have to do is type in what you want Wonder to make. For example, a shipwreck underwater or a lost city. Pick a style such as anime or cinematic and hit create. With this app, you have an entire world of creativity at your fingertips. The realistic style works extremely well, and it's hard to tell that a human artist didn't create the artwork, but an AI. The future is now, and people have been able to create incredible dramatic images that you may have seen already, such as the last selfie on Earth or a bunker surrounded by fire during the end of the world. If you want some super creative selfies or want to just create something unique, type in your prompt like beautiful golden ancient lost city with waterfalls and see what you get. This is perfect to be able to imagine what historical places may have looked like, and you can play around with what style you want. By clicking the link in the description box below the video, you can now get a free trial of the premium version of the app. You will never get tired of the endless possibilities that the Wonder app has to offer. Remember that from turning your selfies into works of art, to turning words into art, to then sharing what you have made, the possibilities are endless. So get inspired and click the link in the description box below to get a free trial of the premium version of Wonder. That means more than 20 styles, unlimited art, and no ads, all at a faster speed. Start getting creative today. Number 9. Antioch. Antioch, often considered the cradle of Christianity, is an ancient city that's been occupied since at least 300 BC. It originally served as the capital of the mighty Seleucid Empire, founded by one of Alexander the Great's generals named Seleucus. It then became the capital of the Byzantine Empire, and much later served as the capital of one of the 4 Crusader states during the First Crusade. Even after being destroyed by the Mongols in the 13th century, Antioch survived and is still alive today. However, the name has changed, and it's now known as the city of Antakya in Turkey. Surprisingly, it's still one of the most dangerous places to live in the entire world. The issue with Antioch is that it sits on one of the most volatile fault lines in the world. Because of this, it's been the victim of some of the most violent earthquakes in history. In the year 115 AD, 1900 years ago, an earthquake of about 7.5 magnitude nearly destroyed the entire city and 4 other ancient cities in the area. The earthquake was so immense it caused a tsunami that crashed into the city of Caesarea in Judea and almost pulled it into the ocean. The same thing happened just 400 years later in 526 AD. This earthquake was so bad, it's still considered one of the worst natural disasters in human history. About 250,000 people died as a result of the earthquake, which shook the ancient city apart. You'd think that after all these disasters, the area would be vacated, but this city is still populated today. Unfortunately, it continues to exist on the fault line, and it's way overdue for another earthquake. Number 8. Japan's Waco Pirates. The The seas around East Asia were some of the most dangerous in the world until just recently. Starting around the 13th century, a group known only as the Waco began participating in what some might call violent pirate activity along the coastlines of Japan, Korea, and China. They operated specifically in the Sea of Japan and the East China Sea, but nobody is really sure who these people were. The pirates showed up about 500 years after the Vikings stopped pillaging the European coastline and many parts of Asia. It was around this time that a group of people, likely Japanese, took to a life of piracy. They terrorized coastal towns from the eastern edge of Korea all the way past the island of Taiwan. The exact history of the Waco pirates is murky at best, with some saying small bands began raiding as early as the 3rd century. They likely started out as disgruntled Japanese sailors who wanted more money. But then, over the years, the majority of these pirates became Chinese. Legitimate traders in China went broke because of new restrictions and taxes being implemented by the main government. Hard pressed for money, these legitimate traders turned to illegal activities. The Waco pirate situation became quite serious by around 1405. There's records of a group of pirates being captured and deported to China, and they were executed in a boiling cauldron. The piracy continued throughout the 16th century and into the same time as the golden age of piracy in North America. Then, the Waco pirates began to fade away in the early 1700s until they vanished altogether. Number 7. Jerusalem. Jerusalem has seen a lot of death throughout its long history. You were basically gambling with your own safety if you chose to live in Jerusalem because it was destroyed so frequently. The city was founded in 4500 BC and was seen as the holiest place on earth by every Abrahamic faith. Jerusalem has proved time and time again to be extremely dangerous, and on at least 2 occasions, the entire city was fully destroyed. On top of that, it's been attacked 52 times, besieged 23 times, and captured 44 times. The first major destruction came in 589 BC, when King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon attacked the kingdom of Judah. Then, in 70 AD, it was fully destroyed again by the Romans. Jerusalem also saw a lot of action in the period of time between its 2 major annihilations. It was taken by Alexander the Great in 332 BC. After the Roman period came the Byzantine period. Then the Muslims occupied the city and conquered it in the 7th century. The First Crusade was launched in 1099 to take the city for the Christian Church. Once again, almost every resident of Jerusalem was slaughtered when the Crusaders entered its gates by force. If you lived in Jerusalem at any point during ancient history, you were never far away from being the victim of a total massacre. And now for number 6. But first, it's shoutout time! I want to say a big thank you to Ludmila Machado and Daniel Holland for supporting this channel. If you are new here, welcome! And be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family. Number 6. The streets of Rome. The city of Rome was one of the most dangerous places to live in the ancient world. Most historians like to romanticize what some consider the greatest city ever built, but the truth is that Rome was a violent and problematic place, specifically in the 1st century BC, during the reign of Julius Caesar, when there were about 1 million people living within city limits. Rich people, poor people, slaves, and foreigners from faraway lands all inhabited ancient Rome. It was one of the first truly multicultural metropolises on the planet 2,100 years ago, complete with slums and ghettos like you wouldn't believe. The city's temples, impressive columns, and plazas were definitely majestic, but the back streets were paved in blood. Outside the civic center, Rome was mostly a labyrinth of narrow alleyways and dark, dripping passages. There was no light, and there was nowhere to throw your waste except out your window and onto somebody's head as they walked along the street below. Rich people didn't venture out at night, or at least not without a private security team. Anyone with anything to lose typically stayed at home. That was, unless they wished to be beaten to death and robbed in an unlit alley by the starving Romans on the lowest tier of society. Number 5. Slavery in Egypt. The Greeks, for all their philosophers and colorful mythologies, were some of the worst enforcers of slavery in human history. This was especially true during the Greek occupation of Egypt, which lasted from between 305 to 30 BC. It was one of the most despicable episodes in Egyptian history, and the area was dangerous for anyone who wasn't ethnically Greek. After Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, the descendants of Ptolemy I, one of his generals, ruled the land as kings. With Egypt firmly under Greek control, more and more Greek citizens poured into the country. They brought their slaves with them, and this changed the local dynamic quite a bit. During this time, slavery in the home boomed. Greeks loved having their slaves around them all the time. The majority of the slaves were from distant lands also under Greek rule and were not Egyptian. It's also important to note that Greeks were generally the only people who could afford slaves because the Egyptians were at the lowest end of the social ladder. Even though it was their country, they were the poorest and most unfortunate people during that time period. If you were Greek living in ancient Egypt, you were likely part of the upper class. If you were anything else, life was miserable and dangerous. And if you were a slave, life was even worse. Slaves were typically whipped for any transgression, and they were even branded on the forehead so they could never run away. A slave's only chance at living a decent life was to earn their freedom or to escape and risk being brutally punished. Number 4. The Viking Explosion. A volcanic eruption scared newly settled Vikings in Iceland so bad that they gave up their Norse gods and converted to Christianity. At least that's according to a new study by a team of researchers from the University of Cambridge. They investigated a volcanic eruption that occurred in the 10th century, which they say was the largest eruption in the island's history. The description of the disaster can be found in old medieval poems. However, the scientists went a step beyond that and used ice core samples to get an approximate date of 939 AD. According to researchers, the eruption continued for over 12 months without stopping. If this doesn't sound like the end of the world, I don't know what does. The date matches up perfectly with the first 2 generations of Viking settlers in Iceland. Some of the earliest people to live on the island, who arrived as children, witnessed the eruption with their own eyes. The impact of the eruption was enough to make the settlers believe that the mythical Ragnarok was coming. In ancient medieval texts, writers explained how the eruption in Iceland marked the death of the pagan gods and the rise of the Christian god. The authors of the study say that following the eruption, there would have been many years of darkness, cold, and very strange times for the Vikings. They really may have thought their gods died in Ragnarok, and this likely helped push future generations to accept Christianity as their new religion. Number 3. The Destruction of Sodom. The story of Sodom is well known to most people, even if they don't believe in the Bible. God was so disturbed by the sinful things going on in the city of Sodom that he destroyed it with fire and brimstone. In the book of Genesis, it says, "The smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace." God brought his fury down on the sinners, annihilating their city as if by an atomic bomb. That makes the city of Sodom one of the worst places to live during biblical days, or 3,600 years ago. In modern times, archaeologists have identified the ruins of Tal el-Hammam as the true city of Sodom. Even more recently, researchers discovered that the city was destroyed in the blink of an eye by a meteorite. The annihilation was so fast and so fiery that it likely served as the inspiration for the biblical story of Sodom that came later. Archaeologists found proof that the city was destroyed in a scorching fireball in 1650 BC. They found evidence of pottery melted into an ooze, and they unearthed human beings who had been ripped apart as if they were exploded by grenades. During the natural disaster, the city was covered in fires, which burned their grain, singed clothing, melted roof clay, and pulverized stone. Many of the melted materials require temperatures upward of 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit to fully melt. The only logical conclusion scientists can come up with is that a meteorite entered the atmosphere and caused a cosmic airburst, equivalent to about 1,000 Hiroshima atomic bombs. Number 2. The Deadly Quake. The deadliest earthquake in the history of China happened almost 500 years ago. On January 23, 1556, Shanxi became the worst place on the planet to live. About 830,000 people died. It's difficult enough to count the casualties in a modern disaster, never mind one from the 16th century. But regardless, the quake is still considered the deadliest natural disaster in human history. It struck late at night and had a magnitude between 8.0 and 8.3, which isn't the strongest tremor ever recorded. However, it did occur in the middle of an extremely populated area. Because this was 1556, buildings weren't exactly built up to be able to withstand earthquakes. In the city of Huaxian, every single house collapsed. Every structure, temple, and building crumbled to the ground. This disaster resulted in about half the city's residents dying within just a few minutes. In some places, crevices opened up in the ground that were 60 feet deep. But that wasn't all. The earthquake caused chaos and widespread death for 300 miles in every direction. It even triggered landslides, washing away entire neighborhoods and settlements. Number 1. The Fall of Egypt. The people of ancient Egypt were going through a very tough time during the last few centuries of their existence. It was one of the worst places in the ancient world to be living between about 300 BC and the death of Cleopatra in 30 BC, ending the reign of what we call ancient Egypt. But what's really interesting is that scientists believe they may have found the cause for ancient Egypt's ugly fall from grace. They believe a major volcanic eruption happened on the other side of the world, triggering a severe drought along the Nile. This drought ultimately led to the famine that devastated Egyptian society, allowing them to be so easily defeated by the Roman army. The discovery came from the ancient city of Berenice, located on the Red Sea. The lost city was found in 1994, but recent excavations have revealed something shocking. Berenice was originally founded around 275 BC, and then it was abandoned just a couple decades later. Archaeologists uncovered the remains of a well, which they say dried up around 220 BC. This points to a very obvious drought that most definitely plagued the Egyptians. Scientists believe it was because a volcanic eruption occurred either in Mexico, Japan, or on the island of Martinique. The eruption was so extreme it interrupted the annual monsoon and prevented rain from replenishing the Nile. In even simpler terms, the volcano distorted weather patterns, changing the climate and leading to the fall of ancient Egypt. Thanks for watching! Which of these places would you have dared to live during ancient times? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye!